Samantha had just moved into a new house, and she couldn't wait to make it feel like home. However, she quickly realized that something was not quite right about the place. At first, it was small things, a door that would creak open on its own, a sudden chill in the air. But then, things started to escalate. Objects would move around on their own, and she could hear strange whispers in the dead of night. One night, she woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes, and it seemed to be staring right at her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure just stood there, unmoving, until finally, it vanished into thin air. From that night on, Samantha knew that she was not alone in her house. She began to do some research and discovered that her house had a dark past. It had been built on the site of an old cemetery, and the spirits of the dead were said to still roam the area. Samantha knew that she had to do something to rid her house of the spirits that were haunting her. She contacted a local psychic who claimed to have experience in dealing with restless spirits. The psychic came to Samantha's house and performed a ritual to cleanse the area. As she did so, the spirits became more agitated, and the house shook with their anger. But finally, after hours of chanting and incantations, the psychic declared that the spirits had been banished. Samantha breathed a sigh of relief and finally felt at peace in her new home. That is, until the next night, when she woke up to find the figure at the foot of her bed once again. This time, it spoke to her in a low, menacing voice. "You thought you could banish us? You thought you could get rid of us that easily? We will never leave this place. We are here to stay, and you will never be rid of us." Samantha knew then that she was doomed to spend the rest of her life in that haunted house, trapped with the spirits of the dead. Jenna and her friends decided to spend their summer break camping in the woods. They found a remote spot deep in the forest, and set up their tents for a few days of adventure and fun. On the first night, they built a campfire and shared stories late into the night. But as the night wore on, they began to hear strange noises coming from the woods. It sounded like footsteps, and the rustling of leaves. They tried to brush it off as just their imagination, but the noises grew louder and more persistent as the night went on. Finally, Jenna decided to investigate. She grabbed her flashlight and ventured into the woods, her heart pounding with fear. As she moved deeper into the forest, the noises grew louder, until she could hear them just ahead of her. She shone her flashlight on the source of the noise, and was shocked to see a figure standing just a few feet away. It was tall and dark, with glowing eyes that seemed to stare right through her. Jenna froze in terror, unable to move or scream. The figure began to move toward her, and she could see that it was not human. Its body was twisted and contorted, with razor-sharp claws and jagged teeth. Just as it was about to pounce on her, Jenna woke up in her tent, drenched in sweat. She tried to convince herself that it was just a nightmare, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from the darkness outside. The next day, the group packed up their camp and headed back to civilization. But as they were leaving, Jenna saw something that made her blood run cold. A pair of glowing eyes, just like the ones from her nightmare, were staring at her from the shadows of the trees. She knew then that the nightmare was not over, and that the creature from the woods would haunt her for the rest of her life. Sarah had always been fascinated by the abandoned house on the edge of town. It was rumored to be haunted, and locals told stories of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and mysterious disappearances. One night, Sarah decided to explore the house with a group of her friends. They entered through a broken window, and began to explore the dark, dusty interior. As they moved deeper into the house, they heard strange noises coming from upstairs. It sounded like someone or something was moving around, and Sarah's heart began to race with fear. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream from upstairs, followed by a thud. Sarah and her friends raced up the stairs, and found one of their group lying unconscious on the floor. As they tried to revive their friend, they heard footsteps coming from down the hall. Sarah's friends ran for the exit, but Sarah was frozen with fear. She could feel something watching her from the darkness, and she knew that she was not alone. Just as she turned to run, she felt a cold hand grab her shoulder. She turned around to face the source of the terror, and saw a ghostly figure staring back at her. The figure was pale and translucent, with empty eye sockets and a gaping mouth that seemed to be screaming silently. Sarah tried to run, but the ghostly figure held her fast, its cold grip sending shivers down her spine. Just as she thought all was lost, the figure suddenly vanished, leaving Sarah alone in the darkness. She stumbled out of the house and into the night, never to return again. Years later, Sarah still had nightmares about the haunted house and the ghostly figure that had haunted her that fateful night. She never forgot the terror she felt, and she knew that the abandoned house would forever be a place of fear and dread. Mia and her friends were excited to spend the night in a supposedly haunted hotel. The old building had a long and dark history, and was said to be home to the ghosts of several former guests who had met a grisly end within its walls. As they settled into their room, Mia's friend, Sophia, started to feel uneasy. She felt like something was watching her from the shadows, and she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. The others tried to reassure Sophia that it was just her imagination, but as the night wore on, they all began to feel a sense of unease. Suddenly, they heard a loud banging on their door. Mia went to investigate, but found no one there. As she turned to go back to her friends, she saw a figure lurking in the shadows of the hallway. The figure was tall and dark, with glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce her soul. Mia tried to run, but the figure was too fast, and soon caught up to her. Just as she thought it was all over, the figure suddenly vanished into thin air, leaving Mia alone in the dark hallway. The next morning, the group tried to shake off the terror of the previous night, but they couldn't ignore the feeling that they were being watched. As they packed up their things to leave, they discovered something that sent shivers down their spines. On the mirror in their room, someone had written the words "You will never leave" in what appeared to be blood. Mia and her friends ran out of the hotel as fast as they could, never looking back. They knew that they had come face to face with the supernatural, and that they had been lucky to make it out alive. Olivia had always been fascinated by the abandoned mental hospital on the outskirts of town. The crumbling buildings and overgrown grounds held a dark history, and she couldn't resist the urge to explore. One night, Olivia and her friends snuck into the hospital through a broken window. As they made their way through the maze of corridors and rooms, they heard strange noises coming from the darkness. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream from down the hall, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps. Olivia and her friends froze in terror as they saw a figure emerging from the shadows. The figure was hunched over, with twisted limbs and a pale, contorted face. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its skin was slick with a dark, oozing liquid. Olivia and her friends tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It pursued them through the halls, its twisted body contorting in impossible ways as it closed in on them. Just as they thought it was all over, the figure suddenly vanished into thin air, leaving Olivia and her friends alone in the darkness. As they stumbled out of the hospital, Olivia and her friends knew that they had witnessed something truly terrifying. They would never forget the twisted figure that had haunted them that fateful night, and they knew that the abandoned hospital would forever be a place of fear and dread. Lena had always been afraid of the dark, so when the power went out during a thunderstorm, she was paralyzed with fear. She sat huddled in her bed, clutching her blanket and listening to the rain pounding against the windows. As she sat in the darkness, Lena heard a strange scratching noise coming from outside her window. At first, she thought it was just a tree branch tapping against the glass, but the sound grew louder and more persistent. Trembling with fear, Lena slowly made her way to the window and peered outside. She saw a figure lurking in the shadows, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Suddenly, the figure began to scratch at the glass with long, twisted claws. Lena screamed and backed away, but the scratching only grew louder and more frenzied. Just as she thought the window was going to shatter, the scratching stopped. Lena slowly approached the window again, but this time, she saw something even more terrifying. The figure had vanished, leaving behind only a message etched into the glass with its claws. It read, "I see you." Lena spent the rest of the night huddled under her blankets, too afraid to move. She knew that she had come face to face with a supernatural presence, and that it would haunt her dreams for years to come. Rachel had always been fascinated by the abandoned mansion on the edge of town. The sprawling estate had once belonged to a wealthy family, but now it stood empty, shrouded in mystery and rumors of a dark past. One night, Rachel and her friends decided to explore the mansion. As they crept through the dusty rooms, they felt the weight of the mansion's history pressing down on them. As they made their way up to the third floor, Rachel suddenly felt a cold hand grip at her shoulder. She turned around, but no one was there. Suddenly, a voice whispered in her ear, "Get out." Rachel screamed and ran back down the stairs, her friends following close behind. But as they reached the front door, they found that it was locked. They were trapped inside the mansion, with no way out. As they frantically searched for an escape route, they heard footsteps coming from the darkness. The sound grew louder and more persistent, until they saw a figure emerging from the shadows. The figure was cloaked in darkness, with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. Rachel and her friends tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It chased them through the mansion, its claws slashing at their backs. Just as they thought it was all over, the figure suddenly vanished, leaving Rachel and her friends alone in the darkness. As they stumbled out of the mansion, Rachel and her friends knew that they had witnessed something truly terrifying. They would never forget the cloaked figure that had haunted them that fateful night, and they knew that the abandoned mansion would forever be a place of fear and dread. Jenny had always been an avid hiker, and she loved nothing more than exploring the dense forests near her home. But on one particular hike, she stumbled upon something that she never could have prepared for. As she made her way down a narrow trail, Jenny heard a strange rustling sound coming from the bushes. She paused for a moment, but then continued on, thinking it was just an animal. But the rustling grew louder and more persistent, until suddenly, a hand reached out from the bushes and grabbed her ankle. Jenny screamed and tried to pull away, but the hand held her fast. As she struggled to break free, Jenny saw a figure emerging from the bushes. It was a woman, with wild hair and a ragged dress. Her eyes were empty and hollow, and her skin was pale and grey. The woman pulled Jenny closer and whispered, "You don't belong here. Leave this place, or suffer the consequences." Jenny managed to break free and ran back down the trail, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she looked back, she saw the woman disappearing into the shadows. Jenny knew that she had witnessed something truly terrifying, and she never hiked in those woods again. She wondered what would have happened if she hadn't managed to escape, and she knew that the woman in the woods would haunt her dreams for years to come. Carla and her friends had always been fascinated by the old abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The building had been closed for years, and rumors of strange occurrences and ghostly sightings had made it a local legend. One night, Carla and her friends decided to explore the hospital. As they made their way through the dimly lit corridors, they felt the weight of the building's history bearing down on them. As they reached the third floor, they suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream coming from down the hall. They cautiously made their way towards the source of the sound, but as they turned the corner, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A ghostly figure was hovering in the air, its body translucent and glowing with an eerie light. It had a twisted, contorted face, and its eyes were filled with an otherworldly rage. As Carla and her friends stood frozen in fear, the figure suddenly lunged towards them, its ghostly arms outstretched. They ran for their lives, but the figure pursued them relentlessly, its ghastly laughter echoing through the halls. As they stumbled out of the hospital, Carla and her friends knew that they had witnessed something truly terrifying. They would never forget the ghostly figure that had haunted them that night, and they knew that the abandoned hospital would forever be a place of fear and dread. Martha had always loved her little cabin in the woods. It was her own personal paradise, away from the stresses of city life. But one night, everything changed. As Martha settled into bed, she heard a strange scratching sound coming from outside. She got up to investigate, but when she looked out the window, she saw nothing but darkness. As she got back into bed, the scratching grew louder and more persistent. It sounded like it was coming from right outside her door. Martha hesitantly opened the door, but she saw nothing in the dim light. She closed the door and got back into bed, but the scratching continued. As the night wore on, the scratching turned into pounding, and Martha realized that something was trying to break into her cabin. She tried to call for help, but her phone was dead and the nearest neighbor was miles away. In a panic, Martha barricaded herself in her bedroom and waited for dawn. But when the first light of morning broke through the window, Martha saw something that chilled her to the bone. Scratched into the wood of her front door was a message, "I will always be watching." Martha knew that she was never truly alone in her cabin, and the thought of what might be lurking in the woods outside would haunt her for the rest of her days.